Hola, mi gente. Thank you for joining us on the Mano a Mano podcast. I'm George Laws Garcia, Executive Director of the Puerto Rico Statehood Council.
And I'm Martin Rivera, Director of Advocacy. In today's episode, we want to provide updates shaping the 2024 presidential election, the upcoming plebiscite on the island.
And later in the show, we'll also be joined by the chairman of the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico and Executive Director of the Puerto Rico Federal Affairs Administration, Luis Dávila Pernas. During our conversation, we'll discuss the latest in Puerto Rico and national politics, including his recent experience as a delegate during the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, and what it all means for the island's future prospects for statehood.
So, let's get started.
All right, Martin. Well, let's kick it off with some news and updates. What's going on?
It's the first week of September after an exciting August recess. Both the House and the Senate are still out in recess till next week. But the big priority when they do come back into session is funding the federal government, appropriations. It seems that more likely than not, the deadline to fund the government is September, but there seems to be consensus that there likely will be a continuing resolution, either all the way to December, which is what Democrats are looking for, or what Speaker Johnson has recently stated that he wants an extension of a CR, a continuing resolution, all the way up till March of next year. Either way, that's the priority for Congress in the month of September when they come back.
So the House and the Senate have been out. The main action for the past month has really been on the campaign trail. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happened in the presidential race and specifically at the DNC convention, which was the big political news of August?
Yes, well, again, an exciting August. President Biden, again, decided not to run for re-election, and Vice President Kamala Harris was the presumptive nominee. She was officially nominated at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago as the presidential ticket. And also, she chose for vice president, she chose Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate, and they were both nominated at the convention. The selection of Governor Walz, I think overall it's a good thing for the Puerto Rico status issue and statehood overall, since Governor Walz has been very supportive of disaster relief efforts and to resolving the status issue overall in the past. But there was also two big exciting news that occurred during the convention. The first one is that the Democratic Party, on their official platform, endorsed the Puerto Rico Status Act as the means to finally resolve the island's territory status. Additionally, there was a little bit of excitement during the second night of the DNC during the roll call when the delegates from Puerto Rico officially endorsed Kamala Harris for the presidential nomination, but also they declared Puerto Rico as the next State of the Union, which is very exciting. And I was there at the DNC, and that issue kept being discussed by people that are not associated with Puerto Rico from other states or delegations, and good feedback overall.
And that particular pronouncement, it ended up making kind of national news as well.
Oh, yeah. It got picked up by NPR and NBC News. So it shows the importance of actually addressing this issue at the national level and how it will have impact in federal elections stateside overall in those key states like Florida, New York, Illinois, Pennsylvania. And again, it was a point of pride, just an inclusion when those things occurred, that at the end of the day, the federal government and the Democratic Party is moving forward to resolving this issue.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So now looking back to still what's going on in Puerto Rico, one of the things that is the most significant development that we saw there is that there was a major Supreme Court decision that took place regarding the Puerto Rico political status plebiscite that Governor Pierluisi announced will take place along with the general election. So can you give us a little bit of background on how that lawsuit came about, and then what did the Supreme Court find?
Yeah, well, the Independence Party, basically, they're the ones that initiated this lawsuit trying to invalidate the upcoming plebiscite, saying that the governor didn't have the authority to do an executive action to declare the plebiscite. They said that it was a separation of the three branches of government, but the Supreme Court of Puerto Rico said no. At the end of the day, this was passed by a previous legislature, and it actually signed by the previous governor. So he had that authority. The the legislature of Puerto Rico delegated that authority by law to the governor. The governor just executed his authority, and basically the Supreme Court validated the upcoming plebiscite.
And that's a big deal because in the past, in 2017, and I think prior in 2012, every single attempt by opponents of statehood for Puerto Rico to essentially block a plebiscite from taking place, every single lawsuit, what have the results been?
They have failed each and every single time because, again, it's the right of the people of Puerto Rico to express their preference for their future status. It's a right of self-determination that, again, the Supreme Court has said in the past is a legitimate exercise of self-determination, just as all the previous plebiscites have been, and that just because you don't like the upcoming plebiscite doesn't mean it's not a legitimate one. So, again, they tried to invalidate it. The Supreme Court said, no, it's a valid exercise of self-determination, and it can go forward.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because at the end of the day, you don't actually move an issue forward by stopping people from having the option to actually vote and exercise their, democratic rights in a democracy. You go out there and you campaign and you convince people that your preferences, your candidates, your ideas are the ones that, they should vote for. And if at the end of the day, the majority of people who show up to vote don't support, what you advocate for, then, democracy mandates that we accept the results and that we allow majority rule to move society forward. Because otherwise, how would we ever be able to make any decision in society?
Right. And this upcoming plebiscite, while non-binding, it is still critical because it will shape the decisions of legislators actually dealing with this issue with the Puerto Rico Status Act at the federal level, and it will give more insights as how to proceed forward. So, again, at the end of the day, people should participate whether you believe in independence or independence with free association, or you believe in statehood as we do. It's the democratic will of the people, and it's a great way to show the legislators that have the power to actually change Puerto Rico status as to what is the will of the people on the island. So while non-binding, it is still critical to move the issue forward and finally resolve Puerto Rico's political status once and for all.
Well, talking about all these issues, I think this is the perfect segue for us to talk about our special guest for this episode, Luis Dávila Pernas. Luis Dávila Pernas is the executive director of the Puerto Rico Federal Affairs Administration and was appointed by Governor Pedro Pierluisi to that position in March 2023. With a background in law and business administration, Davila Pernas has an extensive experience as a federal counsel, a disaster recovery policy expert, and public policy advocacy expert. He's been serving as Puerto Rico's national committeeman to the Democratic National Convention since 2017, and he's the incoming chair of the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico. Davila Pernas previously served as PRFAA's deputy director in 2017 and holds degrees from Florida International University and the Inter-American University of Puerto Rico. He's an attorney admitted in Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., and the First Circuit Court of Appeals. I happen to have worked with Luis in 2017 in the Puerto Rico Federal Affairs Administration, so he's also a personal friend and a former colleague. Welcome to the show. All right, well, welcome to our show, Luis Dávila.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So, Luis, I already read your bio to the audience, and I mentioned that you and I worked together previously. So it's a great pleasure to have you on in our show. And we'd really love to have our audience gain the opportunity to know a little bit more about your role in your official capacity as executive director of the Puerto Rico Federal Affairs Administration. Can you briefly describe to our listeners what PRFAA is and why it's necessary and the work that you do there?
So in very simple terms, the way I would describe the work that we do in our office is we serve as a bridge that connects the local government, state government of Puerto Rico with the federal government. And when I say federal government, that includes Congress, federal agencies, the White House, and pretty much anything that moves in DC, we're involved. So that includes NGOs, think tanks. We're always the point of contact and that bridge that connects, our island, our stakeholders, our government, with everything that happens in our nation's cap.
That's excellent. And, you know, having worked there myself and with you, I know the importance of the work that you do. So I just think that it's a critical agency for the government of Puerto Rico, particularly because as a U.S. territory, we don't have a full congressional delegation. So can you talk a little bit about how PRFAA you know, has to have, you know, the staffing that it does in comparison to the regular governor's offices that we see, for example, in the halls of states here in Washington, D.C. for other states?
That's exactly what I was going to mention, that difference. Every governor has a point person in DC, right? However, they don't have, you know, to carry the responsibility or the weight that we do in our office. Like you mentioned, George, we don't have representation in the U.S. Senate. We can't vote for the president. And also we have only one member of the U.S. House of Representatives without the right to actually vote, even for the legislation that he or she proposes in Congress. So whenever, for example, whenever we have to advocate for additional Medicaid funds for our people, we have to come in with our data, with the effects of actually having to go back to the block grant that we get, which is very limited when compared to what other states get. We need to advocate and bring all that information, and sometimes even educate people that just got to Congress, right? Because there's a turnover, massive turnover in Congress, and sometimes you have to deal with offices and with people who have no idea that these glaring disparities exist. So it's kind of starting all over again every 2 years in some sort of way. And because of that, we have to really put a lot of effort. We always track and monitor regulations that come out of federal agencies. As you know, there's a very short time period to submit comments to try to raise awareness or raise red flags on the application and the actual effects of, you know, specific language that is sometimes included in these regulations. So that's something that we have to do, and not necessarily other offices, other governor offices in DC have to do, because they have the backup of those two U.S. senators, that complete full congressional delegation in the House that can take care of that and protect any interests of the people of those states.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. And then now, looking at your political hat, you know, a lot of people stateside are unaware that besides the local political parties in Puerto Rico that focus on the Puerto Rico status issue, the pro-statehood party, the pro-independence party, and the pro-commonwealth party, island residents also have the capacity to identify with and participate in the national Republican or Democratic Party, despite the fact that we don't have the capacity to vote at the federal level for the president or for voting members in the House and the Senate. Can you tell us a little bit about your role as the incoming chairman of the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico, and about what the party does and how it connects with the DNC at the national level?
Absolutely. I'll start off by saying or describing how the party is formed, right? So there's a local legislation in Puerto Rico, state statute, that establishes the creation of a Democratic and a Republican Party in Puerto Rico. However, these parties are not allowed to position or put people to propose people to elected office.
So they can't have candidates on the ballot?
No. No, they've actually tried it before. I remember a couple of years back, a conservative group of politicians tried to run under the flag of the Republican Party, and they even took them to court. And the court decided that because this was already regulated by the statute, technically they couldn't run under the franchise or under the name of the Republican Party. Same would happen if someone were to try to run tomorrow as a Democrat in Puerto Rico. And that's because, as you mentioned earlier, we're divided in parties that are based on ideology of status, right? That's our colonial reality. And because of that, we're limited to what we could do in terms of our capacity as a Democratic Party to actually run for office as Democrats. However, we do participate. We are a chartered organization by the DNC. We are recognized as the official arm of the DNC in Puerto Rico. And because of that, we have full participation within the National Party, Democratic National Committee. The chair, the vice chair, national committee man, national committee woman all have, full voting rights as any other state. So that becomes particularly important when it comes to approving resolutions, approving amendments to our charter or our bylaws at the national level, and also to elect our chair. According to the DNC bylaws, the chair is appointed by the president of the United States if it's a Democratic president. Now, if Democrats lose a presidential election, then the bylaws state that within 60 or 90 days after the election, there's a reorganization process that happens, and then we come in and we actually have a saying in electing the next chair. That's what happened in 2017 when Tom Perez was elected chair of the DNC after Donald Trump became president and defeated Hillary Clinton in that election. So in that regard, we participate just as any other state. We have the ability to propose amendments to the national charter, the bylaws, pass resolutions. When it comes to the convention, we also send delegates to the convention, and it depends. It's obviously based on population. So we get a similar percentage or a similar number of delegates as Nevada, because we have 3.2 million residents of the island. So in that regard, you could also get bonus points or bonus delegates if you push back the date of the primary, which is what happened this year. So this year, the primary in Puerto Rico was held in late April, which is almost 2 months after Super Tuesday. And all that, those early voting states. And because of that, the party rewards you in some sort of way, right, and gives you additional seats. So we had 65 delegates to the convention that just wrapped up in Chicago 2 weeks ago. That number, George, and Martin, is a higher number than 24 other states. So we had more delegates than 24 other states there, which in the end it also proved to be valuable when it came to approve our party platform, and obviously when it came to voting or nominating Vice President Harris as the next candidate. Everything. This was such a wild carousel and events that happened in a very, very short time period. But the phone started ringing, and no one was thinking, Puerto Rico is a territory that cannot vote for the president or cannot have representation. They knew that we had, more delegates than 24 other states, and all of a sudden we became, really important within that process. It just shows the value of having, that representation, and having that power, really, to make a change, make a difference. In our view, the importance of that convention was, yes, obviously to nominate and ratify the vice president as the next candidate for president and vice president Walz, but also to make changes and make sure that commitments were made by the campaign and by these candidates to assure that Puerto Rico gets equal participation in federal programs, that we get a chance to resolve the political status question, and put it in definitive terms when it came to the platform. That was our main goal, and we got it accomplished.
And Luis, you just jumped to my next question, which, again, yes, you just mentioned that the DNC took a huge step towards resolving the island status, specifically in the party platform. And I believe it was an amendment by you, Luis, that it was for the platform to recognize the U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico have earned and deserved a resolution to the island status. And it specifically endorsed the Puerto Rico Status Act as the means to decolonize Puerto Rico. Can you speak or elaborate a little bit more about the significance of Democrats supporting a constitutionally viable and binding path towards decolonizing Puerto Rico with the endorsement of the Puerto Rico Status Act?
I think it's a huge step, huge milestone. However, we can't celebrate and clap ourselves and say that the work is done. This is only the beginning. But I think it really marks a difference and a contrast with what has happened before. So when you think about the platform just 4 years ago, it only had one line saying we support self-determination for Puerto Rico. And in the initial draft, or the first draft that I reviewed of the platform, I was a member of that platform committee. I saw that it had, very vague, it's very similar vague language regarding, just self-determination for Puerto Rico. And I took it upon myself to really advocate during that platform committee hearing to say and just prove to the people there that self-determination, the phrase in itself, although it sounds good, and who could be opposed to self-determination, by itself has become code for doing nothing.
Yep.
So if you don't want anything to move, if you don't want to, quarrel with any Puerto Rico groups, if you want to, defend the status quo and just leave it there without adding any public pressure or anything, just say self-determination, right?
Right.
And that's something that, we have the opportunity every 4 years, again, to put pen to paper and really make a difference here in writing, have, specific commitments. And, what I expressed in that committee meeting was, Democrats have really made a big effort here to make a difference. We were able to, pass or enact the Puerto Rico Status Act in the House with a unanimous vote of every single Democratic member of that House. So the entire caucus voted for the bill.
Yeah, back in 2022.
Back in 2022, and then the White House came out with a statement of administration policy fully supporting the bill as well. And why is that important? Because, like you said, it's the Puerto Rico Status Act. It's not like any other bill that we've had before. It was, it's called a compromise bill, right? A compromise because it was the result of the meeting of the minds, and a lot of groups who defend different non-territorial permanent options such as statehood independence and independence and free association came together and agreed that this was the best vehicle to move this issue forward. And because of it, I don't believe we've ever had a bill that passed with unanimous support from one side of the aisle. It also had the support of 16 Republicans at the time. Yep. It's currently been introduced in the Senate, and it has a record amount of co-sponsors with 28. The previous record, we looked it up, it was like 16 or 15. And we have the support of Leader Schumer, which is also a significant achievement, because anyone who tracks Leader Schumer's history of co-sponsoring bills, he doesn't co-sponsor that much legislation.
Not very often. Yep.
He kind of stays away from that. So having him step in and say, I'm going to support this, really shows that that this has some legs within the party and within leadership. So again, I think that going back to the platform, it was important that that platform would reflected all the accomplishments that Democrats had done and that the administration and Congress had done up to that point, and just leaving it as a simple self-determination kind of took that away. Right. So the other important major factor is that the Puerto Rico Status Act recognizes that the future of Puerto Rico, if Puerto Rico is to progress, we need to move away from our current territorial status. Current territorial status is not an option for the people of Puerto Rico, because you cannot propose, and you probably heard this before in this podcast, you can't propose the problem as part of the solution. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think it's a major achievement. Locally, it created a lot of buzz. A lot of people, that you got headlines and everything saying that for the first time ever, the Democratic Party platform was rejecting the current territorial status. And I think that's one where the party is not going back. And I think that's an accomplishment, not of me, not of the current leadership, but the whole ecosystem that has been working on this PR51 and all the different stakeholders that day after day, month after month have been really putting in the good work in DC and finally requesting that a change be done when it comes to Puerto Rico's political status.
Mm-hmm. And Luis, there on top of the excitement about the Puerto Rico Status Act being included in the platform, there was also some excitement during night two during the roll call of the DNC. I was actually there during the convention, and I got to see that while there was unanimous support for Vice President Kamala Harris to become the next president of the United States, there was also a declaration by the delegates as Puerto Rico as the next state of the union. I just wanted to take your insights as how that proclamation in favor of statehood was received by other DNC delegates outside of Puerto Rico, and also elected officials, and also the delegation itself from Puerto Rico.
So first of all, I have to give props to outgoing chairman Charlie Rodriguez. He's the one who put together the phrasing and the language that was going to be used in the roll call. He used, part of it. It was done in Spanglish, let's say. It started in English and then it ended in Spanish, which shows, that we can still be part of the United States, still participate in democratic processes, electoral processes, and we wouldn't necessarily have to give up, our heritage or culture, all these, fallacies that all of a sudden people are going to stop speaking Spanish in Puerto Rico because we become a state. But I think it was a recognition that, again, this is the direction where the party is moving, where America is moving. Honestly, you've seen it in polls, national polls. Whenever you poll this topic, better said, more and more people are open to the idea of admitting Puerto Rico as a state. I think, and we discussed this internally. Hurricane Maria and what happened in 2017 really changed the whole landscape and the overall view of Puerto Rico at a national level. That's what opened everyone's eyes to understanding how different Puerto Rico is treated when it comes to federal programs, and even in such important matters such as disaster recovery and disaster response. So, I think that's something that has changed the way that the Americans view the Puerto Rico question, and I think it was reflective of those changes. That roll call, again, every time we had these pins at the convention that said, Puerto Rico Convention Delegate 2024, and it had like a red bulb that lighted up. People would stop me in every corner and be like, "Oh, Puerto Rico, we got to make you guys a state. I can't wait for you guys to, vote for the president, and, have representation in Congress." And then we started giving out these stickers. Puerto Rico 51st state. People were going crazy with those, putting them in their credential badges. They were putting them in their laptops and their iPads. So, I think, that's part of the work that you need to do. But at the end of the day, I came out of that convention saying, oh my God, we've progressed so much, because 8 years ago, when I started going to DNC meetings, it was more, the statehood topic was more related to DC, not so much Puerto Rico. And when people would stop me this time around 8 years after, and they were, I didn't even have to advocate for state of Puerto Rico. They brought the subject to me themselves, right, without even me raising the question. So I think, again, that's part of the, the achievements and the results that we've seen of all this advocacy that has been done for the past 8 years. But we need to keep pushing, because DC, although it's a different case, is still not a state, and it has full support of the party. It has, much bigger numbers when it comes to co-sponsors in the legislation that has been proposed in Congress. So we need to keep working together also with the government of Washington, D.C., to work as a tandem, as a team, because at the end of the day, the basis for both cases for admission is, having that access to that fleet full of democratic rights, which is also something that has been included in the platform. Everyone talks about the Puerto Rico Status Act language and everything. There's a little phrase there at the end of the platform, the Puerto Rico section, that says, we support full civic and democratic participation of Puerto Ricans in democratic process. And that could only be achieved by statehood, within the national, being part of the United States, right? We want to be independent or whatever. Then you could also have full civic and democratic participation. But if you want to be part of the United States, the only way of achieving that is through statehood.
Mm-hmm.
Sense, Luis, and one of the things that we saw also covered in the media during the convention and the immediate aftermath was actually also some opposition groups that were indicating that they were very alarmed by the Democratic Party taking this position and putting in the platform, and they're really pointing at a previous proposal that was debated in 2021, the Puerto Rico Self-Determination Act, as really that being the best option for Puerto Rico, and they were criticizing the Puerto Rico Status Act. Can you give us your feedback and your response? Did that message that those groups and organizations sent out, did that really have a big impact on the DNC, or was that really something that was not really consequential? And what would your response be to some of the complaints and concerns that they put forward?
I don't think it's consequential. It was consequential at all. At the end of the day, this is a very small group that opposes everything, right? They can't agree to anything. I think their strategy, again, is to block every single effort to resolve the Puerto Rico's political status question, because they know that the Puerto Rican people support statehood. So the moment we are given the opportunity by Congress to decide our future political status, statehood is going to win by a landslide. And because they know this, their strategy is to block as much as possible in order for, pretty much throw a Hail Mary, thinking that Puerto Ricans are going to get tired of trying to achieve that statehood status. And then eventually 20, 30, 40 years down the road, for people to get tired of that and say, hey, let's become an independent nation, and then support independence, which is the status preference of their preference, right? The status option of their preference. So I think that's what was behind this whole thing. Again, they tried to make changes. They tried to support legislation that has already been rejected by the original co-sponsors of that legislation, right? The Constitutional Assembly proposal was introduced by Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Both of them, rejected that proposal and moved to support the Puerto Rico Status Act. And they're not going back. It's a before and after when it comes to political status discourse, and people who are afraid that things are going to change and that statehood could actually become a possibility and a reality for Puerto Rico are going to do anything in their power to block it. And that's what we saw from these small groups. If it wasn't for the local press, the local Puerto Rico press, honestly, they wouldn't even get any media attention. And that's the only noise they make, right? We've seen it. Again, the platform says what it says, and not a single member of Congress is proposing anything different than the Puerto Rico Status Act. There is one member of the Senate that is proposing something similar that includes the current territorial status. He's the only co-sponsor of the bill. So in reality, this is what it is, and they just have to deal with it.
Right. And Luis, this is a good transition. Now that the DNC is over, the DNC convention, and Vice President Kamala Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz are the official nominees for president and vice president of the Democratic ticket. I'm guessing you see continuation going, but how do you see the Democratic Party and the Harris-Walz ticket continuing the support of decolonizing Puerto Rico? And you mentioned earlier that the Biden administration signed a statement of administration policy. Do you see their administration continuing the work of the Biden administration?
Absolutely. I mean, when you see Governor Walz's track history when he was a member of Congress, he co-sponsored every single legislation that was introduced by then Congressman Pierluisi to resolve Puerto Rico's status question. Some of them were statehood admission bills, and he voted in favor of those. He's already on record. Absolutely. More so, there was in one of those instances, there was an amendment that was proposed and actually passed to include the current territorial status. Then Congressman Walz voted against that amendment. He voted against PROMESA, and the legislation that pretty much created a fiscal oversight board over Puerto Rico. So I think he's pretty clear on where Puerto Rico should move, what direction we should move. When it comes to the vice president, she was also part of that administration, of this administration, that enacted that statement on administration policy. She has to defend the party platform that includes the Puerto Rico Status Act as what Democrats support and will support in the future. You have Nydia Velázquez, like I mentioned, who's already stated publicly that she's gonna reintroduce the Puerto Rico Status Act. So really, I think this is gonna keep on going, and hopefully, we would keep the majority in the Senate. We can regain the majority in the House, and then with a Democratic president in the House, perhaps that trifecta could result in this legislation finally becoming law, and Puerto Ricans getting the voice and the vote that we deserve.
Well, on that point, we want to also take a moment to ask you a little bit about the efforts that Governor Pierluisi and his administration have done to make sure that when that incoming Congress in January takes office, that they have a reason to pay attention to this issue again, beyond just the normal legislative momentum that we've been putting forward. Can you talk to us a little bit about why you think that the plebiscite that Governor Pierluisi announced in November is significant?
Well, it is significant for two reasons. First of all, it's a carbon copy of the Puerto Rico Status Act. So Puerto Ricans have never been asked directly the three options that we have been put on the table at the moment. We had a variation of that in 2012, but it was a 2-question plebiscite. The first one, do you want to continue as the current territorial status? 54% of the population voted no, and then 63% of the voters elected statehood on a second ballot. This is one where we're using the definitions that have been negotiated by the leadership in Congress. We're using exactly the same language that was introduced in the Puerto Rico Status Act, that was included in the Puerto Rico Status Act. It includes provisions on the options of free association and independence that are very generous, in my opinion, to the people who support those definitions. We're using the same definition that was included on the statehood option as well. So honestly, we're following. I see this as a as a dress rehearsal, let's call it, of what the Puerto Rico Status Act vote could be. In my opinion, I think the fact that it's not binding, it obviously takes a little bit away from it, because people know that in the end, even though it's a very important, strong result that's going to come out, it's an expression, right? A statement by the people of Puerto Rico. Anytime anyone votes for something, right, and exercises their right to vote for something, has a lot of meaning, in my opinion, right? So people who say that this is something that shouldn't be held, that it's a trick or this and that. Why? I mean, this happens in every single election. States propose changes to their state constitution. There are resolutions or amendments that are passed to legalize cannabis or do something else, right? People are asked. So I think it has a lot of value, and in the end, we're going to see those results. We're going to take those results to Congress, and again, it shows. And it's another piece of information. It's not a poll. It's real data, real voter data that you can take and say, over 1 million Puerto Ricans voted, and this is what the majority wants. When you look at the results of the 2020 plebiscite, 53% of the voters elected statehood, as voted yes for statehood. If that were to go to a runoff election, it wouldn't even qualify for a runoff, because you had an absolute majority, over 50% voted for that. And that was in a non-binding referendum in the middle of COVID. So I think we're going to see, a better result this time around. And also, I have to say this too, when it comes to the supporters of independence and free association, they should look forward to voting in this plebiscite, because historically they've never had more than a 5% support in these exercises. And in my opinion, those numbers are going to go up as well, because when it comes to the ultimate definition of people deciding, do you want to become a state or do you want to become an independent nation, even, those numbers are going to go up too. So, I think it's important for them to defend this process and to promote that people go out, exercise their right to vote, and request that a change in status is made and is pushed forward by Congress, be it statehood or independence. So I think there's a lot of value in that ballot because of that.
So one last question to or just wrap up the interview. One of the things that's really important for us is to provide, information and perspectives to our audience about what else do you think that supporters of statehood for Puerto Rico and people who are interested in the issue can do. What other actions, tactics, strategies, and activities, advocacy can our supporters engage in to gain greater visibility for this issue at the national level? What would your recommendation be?
I would say if you participate, have a contact, or otherwise know of a governing body of anything, be it a school board, city council, state legislature, going up to your representatives in Congress and the U.S. Senate, when it comes to town halls with presidential candidates, you need to bring this issue up, because it's not only something that we cannot do by ourselves, but also there's a lot of Puerto Ricans who are living or your neighbors in the 50 states that who serve with you in the military, that pay taxes just as you, that don't have the ability to, for example, they have their parents or their relatives on the island that are suffering, and we depend on those representatives of those states to make a difference for Puerto Rico. So I would suggest that any opportunity that you have to include this as something that needs to be addressed should be done, right? And would provide a lot of help to the Puerto Rico cause, because at the end of the day, George, we can be talking about Medicaid tomorrow. We can be talking about SNAP the month after. We can be talking about SSI, supplemental security income, and the fact that we don't have that on the island, veterans benefits, lack of voting rights. It all comes back to our current territorial colonial status. And until that issue is resolved, all of these issues are going to continue to trickle down, and no legislation, no block grant, no legislative patch is going to fix that. And in the end, if we want to become, we're already the most powerful nation in the world, best nation in the world. Let's make it stronger. Let's make it better by including Puerto Rico, as an equal partner in the UK.
Excellent, Luis. Well, thank you so much for your time. We greatly appreciate it, and thank you for all the work you're doing in public service. If our audience members want to find you, what's the best way for them to be in contact with you or learn more about what you're doing?
So I'm on X as Davila Pernas. So you see my name there in the banner. I'm also on Facebook. My full name, Luis Dávila Pernas. And you can reach out to my office, the Puerto Rico Federal Affairs Administration. We're open every day, and I always check the emails and everything. So happy to connect. And again, we're working hard every day to improve the life of Puerto Ricans, stateside and in Puerto Rico, and we need every help we can get. So happy to connect.
All right, thank you so much, Luis.
Thank you, Luis.
All right, thank you.